Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here. Welcome to episode 317 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. Sticking with the Alaska theme we started last week with my discussion with Tyler Friel on Dall sheep, we have Tyler Kuhn from A-Team Outfitting on the show to talk to us today about bear hunting in Alaska. So in this episode, we talk about hunting both black and brown bear up there, and we dive into the specifics of that, like the time of year they do those hunts, how brown and black bear are alike and different in terms of how you hunt them, things like that, spot and stalk versus baited hunts, typical shot distances, what the terrain is like, all of that stuff. This is a great episode, but before we get started talking with Tyler, I have a couple of announcements. First, the 5-year podcast anniversary giveaway was a massive success. I want to extend my sincere thanks to everyone who entered in the giveaway. As I record this, we are in the final stages of selecting a veteran to go on the hunt in Africa. We have narrowed it down to a couple different people, and we will be selecting one of them very soon. We will make an announcement when that is the case. Now, the rest of the giveaway is complete. All of the winners of all the other prizes have been notified. So once again, thank you very much for your support. Thanks for listening to the show, first off. It has been a great 5 years. I'm looking forward to many more of recording this show. And once again, thanks to all who entered in the giveaway. Now, please do me a big favor. Hit that subscribe or follow button in the podcast app you're using. And please leave a rating and or a review for the show as well. Doing both of those things really helps me reach other hunters like you who enjoy this sort of content. And you'll also start to receive my new episodes automatically every Thursday when I release them. Okay, let's get started talking to Tyler about bear hunting in Alaska. Hello, Tyler. It is great talking to you today. Thanks a lot for joining us on the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you ended up in Alaska and how you ended up outfitting hunts up there before we dive into the details of bear hunting today?
Yeah, so, it's kind of a long story, more or less, but I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, small town called Newcastle, just about an hour outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Grew up living in, Western PA, like most young boys growing up in Western PA. We did a lot of hunting, a lot of fishing, a lot of trapping. For me, it was kind of became more of a way of life, and the lifestyle is how we essentially fed ourselves when I was growing up. So, going down in the Shannock Creek, catching rainbow trout, going out into the Allegheny Mountains, hunting squirrels and white-tailed deer and that whole sort of thing. I mean, that's just kind of the culture from back then. Growing up, that's all I really ever did. I mean, that's all I ever looked forward to doing, both, like I said, as a means of feeding myself and as a means of, recreation and enjoying the wilderness. So as I got older, got up towards my teenage years, I started reading a lot of like fur fish game magazines and started seeing some documentaries on Alaska and like how people live in Alaska, the whole homesteading and the hunting and, people running long trap lines and everything. And just kind of, the term living off the land is, very publicly used these days. And, I don't know if it's necessarily warranted in most cases that it's, utilized in that phrase, but up in Alaska, it sure is. And I found a huge allure to that type of a lifestyle. So as I said, late teenage years, I'm studying how this all works. And I'm like, man, this is something I really want to pursue. So I started at about 16, 17 years old, started talking via email to a lot of hunting outfits in Alaska and started having online conversations and everything with them. And then one thing kind of led to another. And next thing you know, I was able to get up to Alaska and start an apprenticeship.
Oh, very interesting. So how long have you lived in Alaska now, and how long have you been a guide?
Yeah, so I've been up here doing this thing for about 10 years now, the whole guiding, as part of the guiding industry. So I started right at 17. So yeah, it's actually going on 10 years now is how long I've been doing it. And then I've ran my company, my own personal company, A-Team Outfitting, for I believe this is going into year number 4 of running my own business.
Okay. So, you hunt in Alaska, you offer hunting for a variety of different species to include both black bear and brown/grizzly bear. You advertise spot and stalk and baited hunts for the brown and grizzly bear, and you advertise baited hunts for the black bear. So let's dig into the similarities and differences in these hunts in more detail. So I guess to start off with, let's talk about how a baited hunt for black bear compares to a baited hunt for brown/grizzly bear.
Yeah, so pretty much when you're doing the baited black bear hunts, I mean, in Alaska, we have a lot of black bears, and it varies depending on what unit you're in. I mean, the more north you go, like up past the interior into the Arctic and those places, there's not very many black bear, but like down where I'm at in the interior and south central part of the state, there's a lot of black bear population down in that part of Alaska. Even for non-residents in a lot of these units and those sections of the state, you're allowed up to 5 black bears per person per regulatory year. So there's a huge number of black bears, and the black bear hunting pressure is not very high. Most residents of the state of Alaska, if they kill 1 or 2 bears in their life, they've done something. People don't really eat the bears. So for that reason, they don't hunt the bears very much. They're very much more keen to hunting moose, caribou, Dall sheep, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So when you're doing these baited black bear hunts, lots of opportunity. How we do ours is we do remote wilderness fly-in camps. That's 100% of the hunting we do. We don't do anything that's road accessible. There are some hunting outfits that do, use 4-wheelers, side-by-sides, Argos, that sort of thing. We don't. Everything is flown in via airplane. Sometimes we're using float planes, ski planes, planes on big Tundra tires. Most of it is a big, big bush-willed Piper Super Cub is how we're getting into most of my spots. Those planes can land in very small, tight corridors and everything on the river bottoms, on mountaintops. Really, really cool plane that gets you where you need to go. And that's how we access our spots. So I'll find an area usually down kind of low on, in the river bottoms, because when the bears come out of hibernation, out of the high country, they start descending into these lower river bottoms and such, looking for, the first water and the first fresh green vegetation that usually starts occurring in the lower altitudes on the south facing slopes. So that's where I kind of target to set up these bait stations. We go down, we land on the gravel bars, and I slowly start flying in, the bait barrels and the baits, and the guys who are going to come in and help me run the baits. Historically, we've used a lot of like smaller one-man type ladder stands. We're getting more into the tree saddles and that sort of thing is what we're going to be going into more this year and the next year, trying to experiment with those a little bit more so to be able to maneuver ourselves around and stuff out in the bush and be lighter weight, which is key for the Piper Super Cub, that you're only able to, carry a little bit of gear at a time. So we fly all this stuff out there about a month before the hunters show up, and we start setting up all the baits and getting the baits freshened, and then we kind of just live out there. And in Alaska, as an outfitter, we're allowed to have up to 10 bait stations registered in the state per regulatory year. So then I'm able to just, hike around to each one of my bait sites and set up those baits throughout that season and keep those baits running. For the black bears compared to the brown bears, so when we're doing our baits, I'm doing my baits with hunters in camp starting, probably about late in May, let's say no earlier than May 20th or so. But most of the height of our activity starts about that first week of June. Bears, super transitory at that time. The boars are starting to go and start chasing sows around, breeding season's kind of kicking off at that time too. So there's a lot of bear movement and a lot of bear activity. Once we start getting those baits going, it's not uncommon in some of my units in the past where if I didn't have 150 to 200 different black bears hitting, the 7 to 10 baits I had out, I didn't have one. It was unbelievable.
Jeez.
The volume of black bears that we've seen. Yeah. So the black bears, like I said, very, very common. The brown bears in a lot of areas that I'm at, or grizzlies, depending on the area, which I'll get into that semantic term here shortly too, the difference between brown and grizzlies. They're very, very wary, I guess would be the word. A lot of the times, when you have your trail cameras and stuff out, you'll have your routine black bears that are in there almost every single night. Those small ones, sows, South of cubs, shooter bears. The black bears, it don't matter. But the browns, a lot of times, you only have one, maybe two opportunities to shoot that bear that I've noticed, especially the big, mature brown bears. Unless you have a sow that's on that bait, a sow that goes into heat or is about to go into heat, then, you have, unless you have that to where that anchors the bears at your bait, they come in, they grab a little bit of food, and they leave. So that's always my general rule of thumb with my hunters on those bait sites is if I have a good shooter, bear that comes in and that hunter is not super, super picky, I tell the guy, like, hey, man, like, that's a solid bear. You need to shoot that bear because you might not get another chance, especially at that bear. Because like I said, they're traveling, they're looking for females. So he's coming in, he finds your bait. He may never even knew that bait was there. He just happened to be traveling the valley. He smelled that bait, got a good whiff of the scent and came in, ate some food. He's going to stay there a night, maybe two, and then he's back on the road looking for females again.
Man, so yeah, is this a case too? Do I understand you're right that when a grizzly bear comes in on the bait, they come in just real briefly, eat, and then leave? So you just have a very short actual window to shoot one in once one's actually even committed?
Right. And they're super, super intelligent. And their sense of smell, it gets argued along how great it is, but you genuinely hear 9 times better than a bloodhound. So, these bears all know you're there. You're not fooling the bear. What kills a bear on a bait station is its desire to eat in its stomach. Like, the fact that it's spraying it out of the den, and this bait that you have out there is probably one of its first adequate food sources that it's coming across. When that bear comes in and you shoot that bear, you killed that bear because it was literally starving. Like it was so hungry that it viewed eating the food was more important than its personal safety to come in and actually risk eating the food. So these brown bears and these grizzlies, like I said, a lot of times they're super, super nervous. It's not uncommon to hear them around your bait in the forest, around where your bait site is. Just you can hear them like pacing. You can hear them breathing, sometimes snapping sticks and stuff in the distance. And they might do that for a few hours sometimes before they even come in. A good way of knowing that they're coming too is if you have black bears actively eating on your bait and all of a sudden they get nervous and they leave. I've seen that happen where, all the black bears take off out of the area and then you have an hour, sometimes 2 hours of nothing. Because that brown bear, that grizzly bear, he's slowly sneaking his way in there because he just found that bait site and he knows there's food there, but he's also nervous to go in. And, because he smells the human scent, he smells the other bear's scent in that area, but he's trying to figure out how he can go in and get that food. And a lot of times they come in, they eat that food, they try to eat their fill real quick, and I see them they skirt on out of there really, really fast a lot of the time. And you might never see that bear again, or he may come back the next day or a couple of days later or whatever. But breeding, again, that's their main focus at that time of the year. So, when you get those golden opportunities, you need to capitalize on it.
And so you answered another question I had then about how it is not uncommon to have black and grizzly bears hitting the same bait site.
Right. Well, in Alaska, it's not even just common. It'd be uncommon for that not to happen if you're in an area where both those species coexist. Now, you can go to other parts of the state where, there's, perpetually more black bears versus brown bears, or, there's places of the state where there's far more brown bear or grizzly than there are black bears. But a lot of the places I go, there's a good hodgepodge mix of them all. And so what typically happens on the baits is the black bears come in earlier in the evening. I don't even start hunting the bait sites until about 5, 6 or so in the evening. The black bears usually start showing up as soon as it starts cooling off in the evening, around 7, 8 o'clock is what I've noticed. They'll eat for like the first 3 to 6 hours, let's call it. And then all of a sudden you start getting the grizzlies and the brown bears start circulating in a little bit later in the evening, they run off the black bears. However, I have seen very large black bears kind of stand their ground against the grizzlies and the browns that are on the smaller side of things. Like a 7-foot black bear, or like a black bear sow that's really, ill-tempered with cubs. She might stand her ground against a 6-foot grizzly. I've seen a little bit of that mix, but for the most part, most of the black bears, they're out of there by the time the grizzlies and the brown bears start showing up. And then those grizzlies and those browns will feed throughout the evening into the early morning. It sucks sometimes because you get into June, we still have, it's mostly light 24 hours a day, but we do get 2 to 3 hours of like a twilight where, especially if you're having a bait site set up, not even in that 20, 30 yard distance, but rather that 50, 60, 70, 80 yard distance that some guys set up their bait sites, especially if they're in a ground blind. You might not even get good shot opportunities. You'll actually see a grizzly or a brown bear tearing up your bait site at 2:30 in the morning, but it's just too dark to get good visual of your crosshairs to actually make a good solid shot on that bear. So, it can be really, really frustrating at times when you get that opportunity, but really you can't even make the shot because the bear came in so late. So, that's just a whole nother factor that goes into hunting them.
Jeez, man. So when you set this up, are these normally set up as primarily a black bear bait site or primarily a grizzly, or is this the sort of thing, how do you decide, I got a grizzly hunter in, what bait site are we putting them at?
Yeah, so typically most of my hunts are grizzly or brown bear hunters. If I could figure out how to get more dedicated black bear hunters into Alaska, I'd be really doing something, because, black bear hunting with all the planes and the logistics, black bear hunting on baits for the fly-in hunts that we do, they're pretty expensive. So, you can go to Canada for a third of the cost a lot of the times and shoot a black bear or two compared to Alaska. So, most of what my hunts are dedicated grizzly and brown bear hunts with the option to shoot black bears. We have so many black bears in my area that whenever you purchase a grizzly/brown bear hunt from us, you get a free black bear included in the cost. So, we're trying to actually shoot more black bears in our area. A lot of the spots that we go, the moose population, caribou population, the calves get killed off rather quickly by the bears and, the wolves. But one of the biggest predators that predate these calves are actually the black bears. They've done through studies. So we have an abundance of them. So like I said earlier, you're allowed to shoot 5 black bears. So we go in, we set up a dedicated general bait site that's has the sweet smells that attract the black bear. We also have those more rancid meat type and fish type smells that attract the grizzlies and the brown bears. A lot of these guys on these 10-day hunts, they're targeting a good representative of a grizzly or a brown bear, but they're going to have far more ample opportunity to shoot a nice black bear as well. And usually most of my clients, in accompanying their brown bear tag, they also have 1 or 2 black bear tags. And, like I said, the black bear, and a lot of our baits, some years, they're almost a dime a dozen. It just comes down to finding the one you want.
Very interesting. What is a typical size of a black bear and size of a grizzly that you take on these baited hunts?
Yeah, so general rule of thumb, I try, especially if we're getting a lot of black bears visiting the baits, I always try shooting everything on the black bear spectrum 6 foot or bigger. Like a 7-foot black bears, that's a trophy class black bear. 6 foot is where we started shooting them at. That's when they really start looking nice. But again, most of the black bears that we see in Alaska, you're going to see between 5 and 6.5 foot black bears. That's about standard. A bear, for people especially who live on the East Coast that judge bears by weight, that's going to be a, typical 150 to, let's call it, maybe maxing out about 300 or so pound black bear. We don't get the big heavy black bears that you see on the East Coast or in parts of Canada, because these bears hibernate so often up here. They have to go into dens for in some places upwards of 8 months in a den. Like if you go, into the northern extremes of Alaska, I mean, those bears spend most of their entire life sleeping. So, they're not as heavy as they are up here, but we got really good fur. And like I said, we try to shoot them 6 foot plus. Now for the grizzlies and the brown bears, I'll kind of use this opportunity too, to explain the difference of the subspecies.
Sure.
So, so like grizzlies, they're based off of what, common knowledge. People think there are a lot of people in their minds saying grizzlies and brown bears are the same thing, or that grizzlies are the larger of them. Well, in reality, it's completely, different. Grizzly bears typically are more aggressive, but they're also smaller of a subspecies compared to the Alaskan brown bear. Most of the grizzlies that we try shooting are 7 foot plus. Most of the grizzlies that you see, again, as you go more north, they typically average smaller than they do in the southern parts of the range because of protein and food availability. But most true grizzlies killed in Alaska are between 6 and let's call it 6 and 7.5 foot or so. An 8 foot grizzly, that's a really, really good specimen. And then 8.5, that is like a diamond in the rough of grizzlies. I mean, I've only seen that up in like places, especially up towards the Arctic. I've only seen that maybe once or twice in my career, that 8.5 foot range, true grizzly bear. Now the brown bears, they're more coastal animals. The Alaskan brown bear, we kind of start trying to shoot them in those regions about 8 foot plus. 9 foot's kind of like the standard that everybody tries to go for what they view as like a shooter bear. But we start shooting them as the hunter's not super picky. We try shooting boars at 8 foot plus. They mature a lot faster than the grizzlies in those coastal regions because of, genetics and the extra food protein intake that they get living on the coast, eating a coastal marine diet. So they get bigger faster than the grizzlies do. So, when you hear about these 10, 11 foot plus brown bears getting shot, all those bears are coastal brown bears. What makes my areas unique is that we have a mix of both grizzly and brown bear genetics in there. For example, we killed a 9 foot 10 brown bear a few years ago. And if that bear was just, I believe at the time, the place was like about 6 miles or so. If we would have killed that bear 6 miles to the north, it would have been classified as a true grizzly bear. And it would have been in the top 10 biggest grizzly bears ever killed in the entire state of Alaska. But because it was below this, I believe it's the 62nd parallel latitudinal line, it was considered a brown bear for scoring purposes. But again, you see that hodgepodge mix of both those subspecies. We've killed really old bears that were only 7.5 foot and they had rotten teeth and everything. And it was a solid blonde, golden coloration, color phase grizzly bear. And then you'll shoot 9.5 footers that are like 8, 9, 10 years old. So, I mean, it's a really interesting dynamic.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Are you able to hunt brown bear, a true brown bear, over bait, or is that spot and stalk only?
Yeah, you can hunt them over bait as well. Alaska is getting more and more and more lenient every single year on bear hunting. I mean, this is the golden age of bear hunting in Alaska right now. You read a lot of the old stories and stuff from 50 years ago, and people think, oh, well, all the big bears are dead and the bear, population's down. It's the complete opposite of the fact. I mean, 10-foot bears especially, there's way more killed now than there were back 50, 60 years ago. I mean, the bear population in general is much higher than it was. I mean, we're getting to a point in some units of the state, like Unit 17. There's a section of Unit 17, which is in southwest Alaska. The Alaskan government literally had to send sharpshooters out in helicopters, and they were literally shooting bears from helicopters because the population was getting so high that to prevent an ecological emergency on the caribou herds there, they just started shooting predators, from a helicopter. So there's lots of bears. And that being said, they're opening more areas to bait, even in these coastal regions, and they're making it way more lenient on you to be able to go out, set up bait sites, and go out and hunt, these coastal regions for these bigger Alaskan brown bears over bait sites. So there's some areas, and off the top of my head, one of the most famous coastal brown bear areas, like Kodiak Island, which is another subspecies of brown bear, Kodiak brown bears. You cannot hunt them over bait there. In Unit 8 is what that's considered on Kodiak, but the vast majority of the other coastal regions have at least some limited baited brown bear hunting opportunity.
Very interesting. Can you tell us again what your typical shooting distance is on these baited hunts?
Yeah, so the baited hunts attract a lot of archery clients, which makes sense, especially if you're trying to shoot an archery grizzly or brown bear. I mean, I obviously nothing is ever easy in Alaska, but it's by far the easiest method to try to pull that off. So that being said, most of the time we're between 17 and let's say 35 yards most of the time from tree stand to bait barrel. So some of the rifle guys, and depending on location, because it's all location based, some of the areas I bait very swampy, where we have just tiny little black spruce, or there's no trees at all. I mean, it's just really high, thick alder and willow brush to where you can't even put a tree stand in. So some of these areas we're doing more of like ground blind type hunting, and we're on the ground around those bears. I typically bring the ground blind back further from the bait, obviously for more safety reasons and stuff like that. And those more rifle hunt ground blind type setups, they're 60, 70, 80 yards typically, and we're shooting off a rest and everything. But yeah, most of the archery hunters, they're up close and personal right there at the baits.
And what sort of rifle setups do you like to have guys use on these hunts?
Yeah, so it doesn't matter as much on the baited hunts because, you're a lot closer to the animal. For the most part, though, I always try to have people coming with at least a 300 Win Mag. Bonded bullets are, in my opinion, the most essential thing. When you have the Barnes TTSXs, Swift A-frames, heck, even a Nosler partition, I mean, those are all good bullets for bears. You want a bullet that's going to have at least 90% plus weight retention when you're shooting these bears. If you shoot them perfectly in the middle of the body and you double lung them, even with a not so good bullet, at close range, my rule is you don't ever shoot a bear past 200 yards on the initial shot. If you pull that off, that bear's not making it 60 yards before it piles up. But what a lot of times is people screw up the shots, they rush their shots, they flinch, they envision the vitals being somewhere different than they actually are, and they do bad shot placement. Bear gets hit, it's wounded, it runs off. That's why we like being as close as we can, and we like those bonded bullets, because even if a guy screws up, hits shoulder blade and things like that, those bonded bullets are going to punch all the way through and keep going. So yeah, 300 Win Mag is where I recommend they start. A lot of guys, they're coming up with 300s, 338s, 375 H&Hs, a lot of the bigger rum calibers like 300 rum, 338 rum, etc. A lot of the big Weatherby Magnums. So a lot of these guys come up with the big bore rifles. General rule of thumb, though, is don't bring a gun that's too big for you to handle. I see a lot of these guys coming with 338 Wins and 375 H&Hs that can't even handle the recoil, and they're really sloppy shooters because of it, because they're afraid of the gun's recoil before they shot. So they do this prerequisite flinch right before the gun goes off, and they do really bad shot placement. And then I have to go in. If I don't hear the bear die or see the bear die, we wait at least an hour. And then if I go in and if I don't find that bear within 100 yards, or if I hear the bear still alive in the brush, we wait and we come back hours later. But a lot of the times I come back hours later, and that bear, if it's hit, it's hit, but it's hit very badly, that bear still is alive hours later, and then I have to go in on a recovery, and I have at least one time a year where it seems like I get in some varying degree of danger going in on a bear, and it's still alive, and I have to do follow-up shots to finish the bear off.
Goodness gracious. What do you carry when you're guiding these bear hunts?
Yeah, so I carry a 338 Win Mag. I have a Ruger M77 stainless, still all-weather model. I have the most important thing on my gun is my low-powered variable optic scope. I have one of those newer SIG. I think it's the Whiskey series, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a 2 to 12 power scope. I use a lot of different low power optics. I'm getting more and more into SIGs now. I love that a lot of their optics communicate with your binoculars as well for ballistic drop compensation and everything. But that being said, the low power on these low powered variable optics, that's going to serve you very, very well on these bear hunts because we're hunting in close quarters, like brush country a lot of the time. And me being a guide who actually has to go in and actually has to retrieve the bears that still could be wounded and potentially alive, being able to zoom all the way out and to where that gun is pretty much now essentially like an ACOG or like a red dot sight, where if that bear charges you from 20, 30 yards, all you got to do is shoulder the rifle and your crosshairs are pretty much right on it. You don't even have to close your eyes. You don't have to squint. You don't have to do anything. And just look down your optic and you're right where you need to be. And plus, mine being a 2 to 12 power, I also have up to 12 power magnification. So let's say I'm on a spot and stalk hunt. Again, initial shots always sub 200 yards. Guy shoots bear. As a guide, I'm allowed to do follow-up shots once the animal's wounded to keep it from attacking somebody or getting away wounded. So then I can start putting rounds into the animal. And as that bear runs and it gets 300, 400, 500 yards, I have that ability with that increased magnification to keep upping my magnification, staying on target, and putting rounds into the bear as it flees. So that's why I like having the best of both worlds with a lot of these scopes. So, again, the stainless still model, super important, having an all-weather rifle for hunting Alaska, especially on the coastal environments. Everything's wet. You got a lot of salt from both the ocean spray and it just kind of just blows on the wind, it seems like, down there. So, having a gun that's not going to rust every single day. I remember years and years ago, the reason I stopped carrying lever actions. Now, granted, lever actions have come a long way too. They make a lot of really good all-weather stainless versions of them now, especially Marlin does. I had an old Marlin 1895 chambered 450 Marlin, and that thing literally, luckily, it was only on a moose. A guy wounded, and I ended up coming up on it and he was still alive, and I had to put it down, but gun literally rusted up on the inside of the lever action, and it wouldn't cycle after that first shot. Ooh. So then, so then we ended up having to, I had to grab the hunter's rifle on him because he was still climbing up there. I had to run back, grab his rifle, and finish the moose off before, as it was getting up and running away. So, again, rust is not your friend, especially on the bear hunts. So that's why from that day, that was a life-changing lesson for me. So now I only use stainless guns, especially on the actions. I mean, that's just, that could literally save your life up here.
What kind of bullets do you use in your 338?
Yeah, so like I said, bonded bullets are the big thing. I have a lot of my rounds custom loaded. So Swift A-frames are my favorite bullet of all time. They're hard to come by now because of just, the ammo shortages, and then 338 caliber bullets in general are very hard to come by right now. The military's even buying up a lot of them because they're switching a lot of their weapon systems into 338 cal. So a lot of those components are going to Department of Defense. So it's been hard to get those rounds. I've luckily been stockpiling 338 ammo. That's what I use for work. So I have quite an array of them. But like Barnes TTSXs, which are Cawthor bullets, they're a really, really solid round too, a lot more available than some of the other round, especially the lead ammunition. It can be harder to come by. But again, I will use typically, I'll try, at least I should say, any good bonded bullet that holds at least 90% weight retention. If it holds at least 90%, then it's just a matter of, okay, well, what bullet does my gun shoot the best? And like one of my favorite rounds that I've used, and I still own a few boxes of it left, is the trophy bonded bear claws. I mean, they don't even make those anymore. They've been discontinued, but I still have a few boxes. And other than the A-frames, I mean, they were a very close number 2 for me on bear kills. I mean, I've killed a lot of bears with those rounds.
I mean, that seems like exactly what they were designed for. Have you tried the new terminal ascent bullets from Federal? That's basically just the next generation of the trophy bonded bear claw. I know you don't need the high BC bullet and all that stuff out of it, but in my experience using them on other things, they've been super darn tough.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the big thing is, when you get, those good weight retention rounds, I mean, it doesn't matter what you're really shooting. Like a lot of guys love them for elk hunting. I mean, they work wonders on moose. Anything where you can hit bone, and that's what's so amazing about them is I'm keen on vital shots. That's what kills an animal is punching the lungs, punching the heart. But a lot of times, people, whatever the reason, animal moves slightly, whatever, and you can come in contact with shoulder blade. Having a bullet that's going to crack that shoulder blade, push through it, hit vitals, and then push through the other opposite shoulder blade, and then drive out the other end of the animal. I mean, that's impressive, and that's what's nice, especially when coupled with a larger, Magnum rifle round like a 338. I mean, you get those bonded bullets with all that foot-pounds of energy behind that round. I mean, it's absolutely devastating, even on the biggest of brown bear.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit more about shot placement on these bears. You mentioned middle of the middle earlier. Can you describe in a little bit more detail what that means? I've heard people throw that term out before, but you just dive into it some more for me?
Yeah. And I don't know if you have the ability when you release this podcast to show any sort of photography at all to your viewers, but I'll have to send you some photos because it's a little bit easier to explain with photography than it is verbally. But the best way I can explain it to you is on you have white-tailed deer, for example, where their vital organs are up closer towards the front of the chest, up towards more of the brisket, a lot more tucked behind the legs than it is on a brown bear, or a black bear. The lungs are a lot farther back than what people imagine. And it's kind of, if you look at if you go to about the center of the back and then go down about halfway through the bear, coming down from the back of it, that mid section of the animal is where those lungs are. And, it's really, really awkward for some people to try to shoot them there because they think you're shooting guts. Mm-hmm. And it really does sometimes look like that. But in reality, I mean, if you hit them right there, they're not making 60 yards. If you try to do that on an ungulate, you'd gut punch them. I mean, if you try to do that same shot placement on a deer, that's about the worst shot you can imagine. But that's the biggest problem a lot of these clients have when they come up, is that they envision, even I'll show them pictures, I'll even show them vital diagrams of a black bear or a grizzly bear. But when they're looking down their scope, I find that they always drift their crosshairs more so in favor of shooting a whitetail or an elk or something like that. So that's what screws a lot of guys. What happens a lot on the archery clients too, I've noticed, is when they're looking at the animal, especially on spring bear, a hunt, they have a lot of long flowing fur hanging off the body. So they think that the vitals are lower than what they actually are because there's so much fur hanging off the bear. I can't tell you how many guys I've seen, archery clients, literally send an arrow underneath the bear, cut all the bear on the bottom of its stomach or underneath the brisket, the back of the brisket, and zip right through, and the bear runs off completely fine, just pretty much with shaved hair off its chest. Jeez. Because the guy thought it was lower than what it was. Man. The other commonality that I see too is guys just behind the shoulder, they'll actually shoot a little bit higher, where you have that kind of that open space of just diaphragm and that pocket where there is no vital organs. There's a little bit of arteries that run along the spine if you go up a little bit higher, but a lot of guys punch right through that kind of void in there too, and then the bear runs off and you never find it, or it's still alive and then ends up charging. So yeah, I mean, kind of the very, very center of the bear is where you want to shoot. I mean, bears have huge lungs. And if, when a good broadside shot if you punch both the lungs, I mean, that bear, it's not going to be doing too good. Bears do survive and are notorious for surviving extended amounts of time with just one lung. So, I mean, if you have a shot off placement opportunity where you're only thinking you're going to get a one lung shot and you're not going to hit anything else, I'd never recommend that on bears. I was talking to a bear biologist not long ago, and he was doing some predator control work for the state of Alaska, and they actually harvested a black bear once. And upon dissecting the black bear, that bear only had one lung, and the other lung was completely shriveled up, where at one point in that bear's life, that bear was actually shot by somebody, and it was only one lung hit. And that lung completely died and shriveled up, and that bear lived the remaining years of its life until getting harvested with just a single lung in its chest.
Wow.
So, I mean, they're very, very tough animals.
When you are shooting an animal on bait like this, and especially with how nervous you describe grizzly bears coming into bait, how often do you have to have a guy pass up a shot just because the bear's not giving him a good angle or not stopping for him?
All the time. I mean, I'd say it's probably 90% of the plus of the time you're looking at that bear, even on a close spot like that on the barrel. You can move them around a little bit. You know, the way you set your barrel up and the way you have your backing on your barrel, you can kind of help present a better, shot opportunity to where you can kind of force the bear to be broadside for that good clean shot. But again, I mean, they can be very, very skittish, especially in that low light conditions. And, the hunter's nervous because, they know they have this one clean shot opportunity they have to make. So, they're in the tree stand, they're steady, it's low light, they're looking through their crosshairs, they're trying to find, like I said, that middle shot placement in the middle of the bear, and they're really trying to focus on that because they've never shot a bear before. So there's a lot going on. So, if they're nervous or they're shaky or like I just don't feel that they're confident in their shots, then I just tell them let's just calm down. Let's just wait, for that opportunity for you to actually get that good shot. Sometimes it costs them a bear. I mean, sometimes that bear comes in, like I said, it messes with the bait for a little bit, doesn't give a good shot opportunity, and then just leaves. Well, you could have shot that bear, but if you shot and wounded that bear, well, that's your bear, whether we find it or not. I mean, I'm very keen on the blood policy where if somebody shoots an animal, that's their tag, whether we recover that animal or not. So the hunters know that, and, that's just good ethics as a hunter. So, there are plenty times I can think of where we didn't shoot a bear because the hunter just couldn't get where they needed to be for shot opportunity. So, yeah, I mean, it can be very, very frustrating on that front.
Well, so we've talked a lot about baited hunts. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about how things are different when you are going spot and stalk after brown or grizzly bear.
Yeah, so spot and stalk's kind of like the bread and butter of my business. I mean, I favor spot and stalk over the bait hunts, mostly just because I love glassing and I love, doing the stalk and pursuing the animals. I mean, I'm really into that. For spot and stalk hunts, like I said, very optics intensive. We're flying up mostly into the high country on some of these hunts. Most of the spot and stalk hunting we do is in the fall. I do some spot and stalk hunts in June as well, but fall is probably always the better of the hunts, especially if you have a good berry crop year when the bears are up high eating the blueberries. Those hunts, super cub in, land up high on a ridge, set up your tent, and it could be some of the most boring hunting you'll ever do in your life at times. I mean, it's just sitting on a glassing knob for always over 10 hours a day. I mean, you're looking at 10, 12, 14 hours a day, just, binos in your hand or sitting up behind a spotting scope, just glassing distant hillsides, checking berry patches, looking for bears that are just working these patches. Some of the hunts, depending on what I'm seeing or what I'm not seeing, I always bring spike tents and spike equipment out into camp with us. So if we need to leave base camp, we're able to work ridge lines with these small backpacking tents and set up new camps if we need to. That can be a catch-22 at times because, when you're moving around, you're also spreading your scent. So as you hike, like, let's say you have an agenda to hike to another ridge line, you need to always be wary of your wind conditions and your wind direction, because you can completely blow out your area before you even get to it. So wind is super vital on these spot and stalk hunts. But yeah, just it's a lot of sitting, a lot of glassing, a lot of patience. When you finally find the bear, then it becomes a game of chess, I like to say, where it's like you make a move, bear makes a move, you make a move, bear makes a move, until one of you guys end up getting checkmate and win. So, when you're pursuing that bear, you're focusing heavy on the wind, staying out of its sight. Up high, it can be rough at times because there's plenty of moments where you're going to be literally belly crawling across the tundra. There's not much vegetation up high. There's very poor soil up in the tundra. So it's a lot of just like low bush berry crop and tundra moss, essentially. So there's really nothing to hide behind sometimes. So, I mean, I've done a lot of stalks where I might go a few hundred yards just painstakingly crawling on the ground. When I killed a personal grizzly last year in the Arctic, the stalk was 8 hours. It took me before I was able to actually put a bullet in the bear. So, I mean, it can be quite labor intensive to actually, finally thread the needle and get in for the kill. But even on those spot and stalk hunts, again, I don't ever let clients shoot bears past 200 yards. Not saying that clients can't do that, or, we have great rifle technology these days where you can very, very accurately and effectively shoot targets at 1,000+ yards these days. But bears, there's such a large margin of error on shooting a bear where it's just, you get more foot-pounds of energy and way better shot placement accuracy the closer you are. And a lot of these guys, can't shoot very good. A lot of these guys, 200-yard shot, especially if you're from like the East Coast, that's a long shot for a lot of whitetail hunters. So, a lot of these guys have never done anything like that. So I try to get them as close as possible, shoot the bear as close as possible, get as many good rounds in that bear if needed as possible. And then if everything works out, I mean, after days and days and hours upon hours of painstaking glassing, you finally pull it off. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, to me, that's like my Super Bowl, going on these spot and stalk hunts.
In general, do you typically get bigger bears on the spot and stalk hunts or on the baited hunts?
There's no rhyme or reason to it, honestly. I mean, it's all chance based. I get asked all the time, Tyler, what's the success rate for this and that, and what's better? I'd be lying to you if I told you that there was any way to like scientifically or mathematically calculate what your odds are better at. I've had years where I've done baits where it was phenomenal. I've done baited years that were horrible. I've had spot and stalk seasons that in literally a 10-day hunt, we've seen like 13 grizzly bears. And I've been on spot and stalk hunts where we'd never even had an opportunity for 10 days straight. And we hunted every waking hour. Literally, we're taking shifts and everything, trying to find a bear, and couldn't find a bear. In a same area that I've previously killed bears and seen multiple bears in one day on the same hillsides we were hunting just, 2 months prior, the year prior, and have had great success. So, I mean, there's no rule. Bears are just, you hear it all the time, and it's kind of corny, but like you always hear the phrase about bears about, the only thing that's predictable about a bear is that it's unpredictable. I mean, as corny as that sounds, and it's utilized that statement is, I mean, it's true. I mean, there's no rhyme or reason to what these bears do or don't do. I've seen them on tops of mountains. They'll descend all the way down to the bottom, 3,000-4,000 feet in elevation, and then just turn around and walk all the way back up the mountain again for no reason whatsoever. They didn't eat nothing. They didn't do anything. They just decided to go all the way down the mountain and turn around and walk all the way back up. I mean, that being said, when you're even trying to stalk something like that, like you see it coming down the mountain, you think, oh yes, here it comes. We just got to cut it off. And then for no reason, the bear just stops and turns around and goes back. It never smelled. You never knew you were there. It just decided, you know what, I'm just going to go this way now. So, I mean, that's what I love about them is like, it's just so interesting hunting them. They do their own thing when they want to do it, how they want to do it. And that can make it very difficult and very frustrating for guys. I've met a lot of guys that have gone on bear hunts and left Alaska empty-handed. You go to the airport and stuff, and you start talking to guys. I remember talking to this one guy once. It was his sixth successful bear hunt that he did. He was on Kodiak Island. And granted, he had passed up on some bears because he was trying to shoot a really nice bear. But I mean, this guy had probably spent over $100,000 trying to shoot a brown bear, and he hadn't pulled it off, mostly because of weather. The more coastal you go, the worse the weather can be. So I mean, there's just so much that goes into a success rate on these hunts. And you start mixing in clients' ability again. A lot of these guys, by the time they're, able financially enough to do these sorts of hunts, they're a lot older. A lot of them have back problems, knee problems, hip problems, ankle problems. They're overweight. They're up there in age. They have different health problems. So there's a lot of variation in why a guy is or isn't successful on these hunts. But yeah, there's no rhyme or reason between bait or spot and stock on what's going to be more successful, I find.
What sort of factors would make you point a guy more towards a spot and stalk hunt versus a baited hunt, or vice versa?
Yeah, so spot and stalk, that's typically not going to be a high success hunt for an archery guy, for example. If I had a guy told me, hey, I'm a dedicated archery guy, I won't shoot an animal with a rifle, it has to be a bow, I want a bear, what can I do? Well, I give them the option first of the baited, hey, we're going to have to sit in a tree stand, you'll shoot your bear between 17 and 30 yards, etc. It's just a lot of sitting in a tree stand. It's no different than, in some regards, of sitting in a tree stand hunting whitetail, on the East Coast where you're from. It's just a lot of sitting, waiting for that opportunity, if and when that opportunity presents itself. Now, some of the archery guys don't want to hunt over bait, which I understand. So a lot of these guys will be like, hey, I understand that, I have very low odds of success, but I want to go and I actually want to stalk bears. I want to glass. I want to be in the mountain country. I want to hike around. I want to see country, see animals, and chase bears. Those guys know that they're probably not going to have very good odds of sticking an arrow in a bear, because there's so many factors that have to come into place for you to find a bear, sneak in on the bear, and get within, shooting range of a bear with archery tackle. So those guys, I always try to steer them towards the baits, just because I feel that they're going to have a better chance of success if the opportunity presents themselves. A lot of the times, too, the big deciding factor is physical capabilities. For example, the spot and stalk hunts where I hunt can be very, very rugged, a lot of walking. You got to put a rucksack on, even though most of my clients don't carry more than 30 pounds. For a 60-something-year-old guy, 70-something-year-old guy that, has all sorts of health problems, bad back and everything, trying to carry a ruck, even if it's 20, 30 pounds for days on end, hiking to different glassing knobs and sitting and glassing, I mean, that can be pretty tiresome for a lot of hunters. So those guys, the older gentlemen or the ones that have more of the physical health limitations, you almost have to steer them more towards the bait as well. But those really fit, get after it guys that are younger, really in shape, who like to be out there and like to actually pursue the animal and glass and be out there in the mountains, those are the guys I always try to swing towards the spot and stalk, because for one, my personal bias, I enjoy those hunts more. I like being in the mountains and chasing after the bears. So when I have clients that are willing and able and capable of doing that sort of thing, that's where I try to steer them towards.
Okay, fair enough. Well, is there anything else that we need to talk about with regards to these hunts today? You've covered a lot, but is there anything important that we left out?
I mean, I just, more than anything, it's just kind of a recap on what we talked about. I mean, the biggest thing is just your shot placement, having an adequate rifle that's big enough to, do enough damage, deliver those foot-pounds of energy, but also having that same rifle be comfortable enough for you to shoot. Again, like I mentioned earlier, you don't want too much gun that you can't handle it to where, you're sacrificing accuracy for stopping power. I mean, you want to be as accurate as you can. A lot of people back in the day killed these brown bears with 30-30s and 30-06s, without using bonded bullets, just early 1930s and 40s, soft lead rounds. I mean, but those guys shot very well. So, there's a big difference, there. Accuracy is king for sure. And then just, if you go on a guided hunt up here, I mean, just trusting your guide and, and just doing, what he tells you to do. These bear hunts, they can be very long and arduous hunting. It can be very boring for many, many, many days on end. You're going to be in very bad weather for days on end. I spend probably anywhere from 20 to 40% of my time in a tent, where it's socked in, raining sideways, blowing 40 miles an hour outside the tent with fog to the ground. So, expect that as well. To expect to be very uncomfortable and miserable at times, but, that's all part of hunting Alaska, if you ever choose to come up here. I mean, Alaska's the king when it comes to, on big game hunting. So, just be prepared to, and do have a high level of endurance whenever you come up here, both physically and mentally.
Can you recap the dates that you do the spring and the fall hunts?
Yeah, so most of my spring hunts, like I said earlier, the bulk of it's kind of in that first to third week of June. I typically start ending the hunts around the 20th of June because in my area, you start seeing rubbed hides in some locations in that part of June, and then they rub out. And then by about the end of July, going into August, that's when those hides are like kind of like what I'd say uniform, like they're shorter summer coats. There's no rubs or anything anywhere. And then by September, when we do the fall hunts, so I kind of have two different breakups of fall hunting. Sometimes in early August to mid-August, we do some salmon stream hunts where you just sit on the gravel bars, you glass, the bears are coming down to the rivers to feed on the salmon. We do those hunts in the first 3 weeks of August. And then the bulk of my fall bear hunting happens like week 4 of August to the very end of September. And that's more high country on the blueberry patches, spot and stalk hunting.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show today, Tyler. Can you share some of your contact information, website, Instagram, any of that stuff with the audience as we wrap up?
Yeah, so if you want to check us out online, the website's ateamoutfitting.com. All the social media, we have Facebook, we have Instagram, it's at A-Team Outfitting. And then if you have any questions, want to talk to me personally, you can call the business line at 907-651-8495.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I learned a lot about bear hunting up in Alaska from you.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed the conversation. It was really fun talking about it. I love talking about bears, and so I had a really good time this morning.
Okay, I hope you enjoy that. Links to the A-Team Outfitting website and social media profiles are in the show notes, and you can reach Tyler directly at the phone number 907-651-8495. Now, if you are in the mood for more Alaska content, be sure to check out episode 316 with Tyler Friel talking about Dall sheep hunting, episode 289, Mark Helsing, also Dall sheep hunting in Alaska, 282, Tyler Friel talked about the grizzly he took in Alaska with a 6.5 Creedmoor in 2023. Ron Spomer was on in episode 201. He talked about sheep hunting in Idaho, Alaska, and Canada in that episode. 162, Joseph Von Benedict was on the show to talk about moose hunting in Alaska and Canada. He was also on in episode 130 to talk about a solo caribou hunt he went on in Alaska. And then check out episode 92 and 84 to hear about Dan Rowland's Dall sheep and bear hunts up in Alaska. Links to all those episodes are in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you sign up for my email list too. To do that, click the other link in the show notes or go to huntingguns101.com. Sign up there for my free ebook on the best hunting calibers. You'll get that free ebook when you do that. Plus, you'll also receive the emails I send out every weekday. If you like the podcast, especially episodes like this, you will love those emails. So make sure you are getting them too. Go to huntingguns101.com. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.
Brace yourself for something fuel nominal. Unleaded 88 is the clear fuel choice. It's cheaper, cleaner, and greener. And it's grown by Iowa corn farmers. Now that's totally worth the hype. So pump it up with Unleaded 88.